Goedenavond. Welkom allemaal en dank dat u aangeschoven bent op onze bijeenkomst ten gelegenheid van de Internationale Holocaustherdenkingsdag. Ik ben Hanna Loeden, directeur van CIDI. We herdenken vandaag de slachtoffer van de systematische vernietiging die plaats heeft gevonden tijdens de Tweede Wereldoorlog, gestoeld op een ziekelijke ideologie. 6 miljoen Joden, 250.000 Roma en Sinti. Zo'n 2000 Jehovah-getuigen, duizenden omdat ze homoseksueel waren, nog 250.000 mensen met handicap, vooral psychische problemen. En veel meer mensen zijn de slachtoffers geweest van deze verschrikkelijke oorlog. 27 januari 1946 werd de vernietigingskamp Auschwitz bevrijd. In Auschwitz alleen is 1 miljoen mensen vermoord, Joden, 1 miljoen Joden vermoord en nog anderen ook. Op 1 november 2005 besloot de VN om deze dag te kiezen als een herdenkingsdag voor de Holocaust, de Shoah. Dat was resolutie 60-7 in dat jaar. En vanuit 2006 wordt deze dag dus elk jaar opnieuw gebruikt voor deze herdenking. Aanstaande zondag zal de jaarlijkse Auschwitz-herdenking plaatsvinden in het Wertheimpark in Amsterdam. Daar worden de meer dan 102.000 Joden, 250 Sinti en Roma van Nederland herdacht. U kunt ook deze herdenking online bijwonen. Vandaag hebben wij Daniel Rozenga en Michel Kichka uitgenodigd om bij ons te spreken. Met beiden heeft CIDI een langjarige relatie. We ontmoeten hen jaarlijks tijdens onze Deuxième seminar voor docenten. Ik denk dat er momenteel meerdere bekenden van Daniel en Michel in ons publiek zitten. Deze seminar gaat precies over deze vraag. Hoe geven we les over de Tweede Wereldoorlog, de Holocaust en het probleem van antisemitisme en discriminatie? CIDI ziet educatie als een zeer belangrijke schakel in de bestrijding van antisemitisme en discriminatie. Dit geldt voor educatie aan scholieren, maar ook aan volwassenen, wat nog veel ingewikkelder is. In het kader van bestrijding van antisemitisme onderhoudt CIDI ook een meldpunt waar iedereen een melding kan doen van een antisemitisch incident, maar ook een luisterende oor en advies kan krijgen. Bovendien publiceren we jaarlijks onze monitor antisemitische incidenten in Nederland, dat een spiegel vormt voor de stand van antisemitisme in Nederland. We zijn een onafhankelijke stichting en zijn mede afhankelijk van jullie steun. Dat kan via onze website. Daniel Rozenga is een Nederlandse Israëliër, een inwoner van Tel Aviv die oorspronkelijk uit Groningen komt. Hij is docent in hart en nieren, verbonden aan de International School for Holocaust Education van Yad Vashem. Daar werkt hij op de Europa-afdeling en is daar coördinator voor Nederland, Duitsland en Oostenrijk. In dat kader begeleidt hij onze groepen ook altijd. 1 dag in de week geeft hij ook Engelse les op een middelbare school in Jeruzalem. Ook de rest van het gesprek zal in het Engels worden gevoerd. Daniel, Michel, welcome to CIDI. Thank you very much that you agreed to talk to us. And I give the floor to Daniel, who will introduce the lecture and will also carry out the discussion. Daniel?
Thank you very much. I will do it in English also, so that Michel also will understand what the Dutch people are talking about and what we say about you also, Michel. Thank you very much, Hannah. As you said, we know each other quite a long time already. Yad Vashem and CIDI are cooperating already for more than 10 years. I think something like 12 years almost even. Doing projects together, organizing seminars together for teachers. Every year you bring a group with Dutch teachers from mostly high schools to Yad Vashem in order to learn more about the Holocaust and also to learn more about teaching the Holocaust in a different way. And in this context, we also know already for a couple of years Mr. Michel Kichka, that we invited him to our seminar program in order to tell about his family story, and in particular, the relationship between, I would say, his father and himself and his children, I would say in a different way, from the first generation, the second generation, and you could say the third generation. The Holocaust did not stop in 1945 with the end of the war, but actually the outcome or the consequences and the trauma, that is something that the people take with them in their own lives and also in the lives of the children and grandchildren. And I think therefore it's really interesting and really important to hear also the story of Michel, because there you see really the relationship, the complicated relationship, I would say, between the first generation and the second generation. So Michel, I thank you very much for sharing your story with us. Please.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. This is a very special day to me every year, since the date has been decided by United Nations to be the commemoration day of the liberation of Auschwitz. I have prepared a presentation not only on my work, but also on my father's work. And this is, I draw a parallel lines between his life and my life as his son through the works that he left. He passed away in April, last April. He was in Belgium, in Brussels, where I was born to. And he died from corona. He was in a senior house, a Jewish senior house in Brussels. And in the first wave of the COVID-19, they lost 13 members who were over 90. My father was 94. And since then, I looked back to the drawings that my father left, to the drawings that I did, and I composed a presentation of our family story somehow. So I will share screen now with you. Okay. I need to be shared, okay, by the man in charge of this technique, host disable attendee screen sharing. Okay, the sharing screen need to be open for me.
I will send a message to because I cannot help you from
Okay.
here, but I will send a message to. Just a minute.
Yes.
I have already asked Aaron to do it, so he'll do it in a minute.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I will go on. That's it. Okay. Now it's done. Not this one, sorry. The other one. Okay, this one. Good. Okay. My father was born in Brussels in 1976, in April, and he was the son of Polish immigrants who left Poland after the First World War. And he was born as a Polish, he was not Belgian. His parents were refugees. They had a special permit to settle in Belgium and to work. And my father had two younger sisters. He was a happy boy, a happy teenager. When Belgium was occupied in 1940, the family decided to escape to France and to try to reach the free zone. But in the free zone, they were arrested by the French milice and brought to a camp in France. And they were lucky enough. This is the family. This is the family shot by a street photographer in 38 or 39 before the war. And you can see my father, he has the trousers like Tintin, golf trousers. His parents, His father was a tailor. He was working at home, and his two younger sisters, Bertha and Nica. And they were lucky enough, as I said, to escape this camp. They were helped by family from outside, and they're refugees in Paris, in the apartment of my father's aunt. And after a while, my grandfather decided to go back to Belgium. That was in 42, and he could not hide anymore in Paris. It was also dangerous to be in Paris, as dangerous as being in Brussels. But then the family was arrested in a big wave of arrests of the foreign Jews of Belgium. They were all listed by the authorities. They were Polish. So they were arrested in September 3, 1942. They were sent for 8 days to Kazerne d'Ossun in Mechelen. And from there, transport to concentration camps, Auschwitz, and then the women were separated from the men. And my father, who was 16, and he was well built, he was even a little taller than his own father. They were both taken to forced works. And my father survived almost 3 years of forced works in camps. Close to the end of the war was the Death March, where the Nazis concentrated the prisoners who survived till in the middle of Germany, because some of the camps were in Poland too. And at the end of this Death March, my grandfather died. He simply was weak and sick and frozen. And my father was liberated from Buchenwald in April 1145 by the American army. And a few weeks later, he was sent back to Belgium. On the day they were arrested, my grandfather gave a suitcase to the neighbors and asked them to keep it until they will come back. And in this suitcase that my father got back were some of the drawings that he did when he was a teenager. And this drawing, he did it in 41, after he saw the animated movie Snow White. He was very much impressed by this first colored feature animated by Disney. And he reproduced the scene of the 7 dwarfs going back home for their work day. And this drawing was kept. And then it was given to my elder sister, and she gave it to her son, my nephew. And we have decided 1.5 years ago to give it to Yad Vashem. And this is a part of the collection of Yad Vashem artworks that were done by Jews during the war. And this drawing exhibited in Yad Vashem. I visited the exhibition. I was very proud to do it. And this is another drawing that is still home with me. He was a fan of Disney, who was actually an inspirational source for young artists. And he was the most popular animated artist in the world at that time. And these drawings to me are time of innocence. That was before the Holocaust. And they were done when my father was a young teenager, happy teenager, and they represent this period in his life. This is a photo that was taken 1 month before they were arrested in Brussels. And this is my father and his 2 best friends. And the story is that they all survived. And when you consider that 95% of the Jews from Belgium were exterminated, this is absolutely incredible that they were arrested on the same day, they survived different camps, and they were sent back to Belgium, and they stayed good friends until the end of their lives. They passed away before my father, and my father was the last of the 3 to survive until the age of 94. In 2012, I published a graphic novel, which is an autobiographical graphic novel called Second Generation, The Things I Did Not Tell My Father. And I used those photos, the very few photos that I had, to document myself. And concerning the Holocaust itself, I could find any picture that I needed in Google by simply clicking Auschwitz or Birkenau or Hitler. So I could reconstitute some of the scenes, and the rest of the images of the book were the fruit of our family album and my visual memory. Okay, and one of the photos, for example, that I used was the symbolic, the iconic photography of the liberation of Buchenwald. And the man in the red circle is Elie Wiesel. And actually, my father and Elie Wiesel were both in Buchenwald on the day of the liberation. They never met at that time, they met afterwards. But this is a photography that I always saw as a kid because it was in a book that my father had. And because he was not telling us anything, we were 4 kids, and my father was absolutely unable to share his experience with us because we were too young. Because it was too difficult to tell about this. So I was watching the books. I was watching the photos in the books that he had in his library to try to understand what was the Holocaust about. And even before I could read. In Yad Vashem, we found in the archives, a friend of mine working in the archives sent me one day this document that was filled by the American authorities, which was the military government of Germany after the liberation. And it was done in, as you can see, in Buchenwald in April 20, 1945, in Weimar. My father's name is Kichka Henri, and the writing is the Polish writing. He is male, born in April 1426. Student, he was in high school, and he was arrested in September 3, 42 in Brussels, and the reason of the arrest is Jew. It's so clear and so simple. You know, all the Belgian Jews and the foreign Jews in Belgium were like cataloged. All the municipalities had lists, and they needed to go with the identity card to be stamped, the letter J as Jew. And it was all prepared to facilitate the arrestation and later on the extermination. So the fact that the Nazis has organized this Holocaust so well in Brex, in a so ordered way, you still can find till today documents that shows and proves exactly all the steps that my father passed through. He was in 9 different camps, and in each camp he was an admittance form and then an exit form, and all those things exist. So this is a Holocaust that was documented, and this is incredible that we are still able to find this. And in the back of this same document, he was released to Belgium. You see, released, typed in the middle of the document, because my father gave addresses of people he knew in Brussels. Because he was not yet an adult, considered adult, he was 19. And you were adult at the age of 21 at that time, but he could be sent back to Belgium. And at the bottom of the document, you can see the names and grades, the signatures of 4 American officers, a colonel, a captain, and a first lieutenant that signed that he was in a condition to be released back to Belgium, and it was in May 12, 45. And then he was sent back to Belgium. I think the big luck that he has, that he was liberated by the American army, because the liberated people by the Russian army had not exactly the same itinerary. When he was sent back to Belgium, he had tuberculosis. He weighed 30 kilos at the age of 19. And he had all the disease that you got in the camps, and bad nutrition and so on. And he was in a sanatorium for 1 year. And during the year he was in the sanatorium, between the age of 19 and 20, he drew caricatures for himself. He simply had, let's say, a talent. He was born with talent. He never studied, not yet. He was just in high school. But look the way he drew Hitler and the way he drew this Nazi soldier. And he drew also this one of Hitler refused entrance in hell by Satan. And at the bottom you have in Flemish, Woden en binnen. Okay, and this woman is selling Hitler and bombs and all the facts of the war. Okay, and he was actually very talented. And when I was a kid and when I was a teenager, these cartoons were in a box somewhere in his room, and I never saw them, which means that when I was a young boy and when I was a teenager and when I became a cartoonist later on as an adult, I did not know that my father wanted to be a cartoonist after the war. But then, and the thing is that when I had those drawings like the Hitler one, and I turned the page, that was done on the back of a poster, the National Day of the Tuberculosis. Okay, these were the papers that he could have. He did not have A4 80 grams paper in his printer. So he used papers that were left and to draw on the white side of it. And because paper was very rare during the war. In 1948, he met my mother in a dancing room where young Jewish in Brussels met. And a few months later, they married. They fell in love and they married. And this is a photo of my father on his 75th anniversary with my mother. 6 months later, she passed away. She had a leukemia. And that was in 201. And this drawing on the left is a drawing I did from a photo of their marriage. Now, when my mother discovered that my father was so talented, she said, "You must go to the academy." Because my father said, "My dream is to become an artist." So during the day, he was working in a little fashion shop with my mother that belonged to my grandparents, my mother's parents in Brussels. And he took evening classes in the l'Académie des Beaux-Arts in Brussels. And they learned typography and poster design and coloring. These are works from that period, which was 49 and 50. And then in 1950, this is, you see, from 50. This is a frame from Tintin, the mystery star, that he copied, just to show you how the mastership that he had in pen and ink. It was really very good. And this is another drawing of him on the same period. This drawing I kept. They are here in my home in Jerusalem, in the room I work in. Some of them are framed on the wall as some evidence of what I do today. And this is the four of us. When my father met my mother, he said to her, "If we marry, I would like to have 4 children because I lost 4 members of my family, my parents and my 2 sisters. And my mother, who was the elder sister of a family of 5 kids, agreed to her 4 was a, let's say, logic number. And we were born, my sister Hannah in 50, I in 54, Irene, my younger sister, in 56, and Charlie, my younger brother, in 57. And this is in Knoklezut, where we had our family vacancies 2 weeks a year. This is in Liège, in Luttisch, in Luik, where I grew up, in a suburb of Luik. And this is me with my father working in the street of Liège. And these are my happy days. I was a happy boy, always laughing, always positive. The farthest memory that I have, which is also the first memory that I have of me and my father, and I forgot to tell you that my mother's family escaped Belgium and they could refugee in Switzerland. They were lucky enough to be accepted there. And they were separated in different houses, different families. And after the war, they could regroup and go back to Belgium and go on their business. They also had a fashion shop. When I was 6, one day, my father took me in the kitchen on his knees. He took a white paper and drew me a ridiculous Nazi going like, you know, like a duck. And he wore the peapot on his head and he had a boxer with flowers and he looked ridiculous. And I was laughing and laughing and laughing when my father was drawing this. I did not know that he wanted to be an artist, but that was somehow a way from him to make a sort of act of transmission. Because actually this is what I became. I became an artist, I became a cartoonist, and I became a comics creator, author. And the same scene that we sit in the kitchen, I drew in the foreground at Himmler in his black uniform with his Heil Hitler. And my father is dancing around, mocking him, as if this drawing was a late revenge. And he's mocking him around, which is a thing that you could not do in the camps. You were simply shot on the place with no trial. When I was a kid, I also, one day, I was already 13. You see, that was in May 67. I was 13 in August 67. I discovered a book in my father's library, which was a collection of the best cartoons done on Hitler during the war and published in the American and British press. And I was training myself, copying the cartoon that I loved more, like this one, where you can see Goebbels, that looks like a monkey more or less, who draws Hitler as a god, an antique god, and the real Hitler is this guy with the shit flies over his head. And in one hand, that was making me laugh because I understood the mechanic of a cartoon, what makes a cartoon funny, how you can draw someone ridiculous. And in the other hand, I was all the time training my hands to use the classic tools, to use a pen and ink and to use pencils and to use brushes and to copy, because copy is the basis of becoming later on an artist, okay? First of all, you copy, you're influenced by your masters. And my masters were belonging to the comics and the cartoon field. And this is another on the bottom and at the top, another that I drew. And on the bottom, this is the one of my father, which say that as a young teenager, I was doing cartoons, which was the profession that I did not know that my father wanted to do in his life. This is absolutely incredible. The only thing that during the years that he was working in the shop with my mother, which were 35 years, he almost did not touch a pencil. But one day he created for our Jewish community center in Liège, this painting of Moses with the table of the law after an engraving of Gustave Doré. That was an oil painting that still is hanged in this community house, and I took a photo when I visited it. And this is the same drawing that I did in a book later on. I will tell it about you. In 85, my father could retreat because a new law was voted in Belgium that war prisoners could retire at the age of 60 instead of 65. because they have suffered enough, okay? So at 60, my father retired. My parents decided to sell the shop, to move to Brussels, where my father grew up and was born. And at the same year, I drew a poster. I already was in Israel since 74, when I was 19. And I drew this poster about a life in a kibbutz. And on the roof, the painter is my father. I simply decided to put my father in my drawing as a private joke, somehow to make him smile. But what I did not know is that at that same moment, my father decided that if he had retired, he can try to go back drawing. And I drew him drawing and painting. And this is from closer, okay? And I was drawing posters, busy posters with a lot of people, with a lot of jokes, a lot of humor. That was the style of things that I did in the 80s. In 86, my father came to visit us in Jerusalem with my mother. They were coming twice a year because I had my older sister, Hannah, in a kibbutz, and she had 3 kids, and we were in Jerusalem, and we had 3 kids. And then for my father's birthday, that was in April, I bought him a drawing block and pencils. And he opened the first page of the drawing block. He sat in the street in front of our house where we live till today, and he drew the house. And the incredible thing is that that was as if he never stopped drawing, as if he was exactly at the same point where he was when he was studying at the academy. And you can see at the bottom the date. The date is April 25, 86. My father died on April 25, 2020. This is incredible. And he entered the elderly house in Brussels on April 11, which was the day he was liberated from Buchenwald. Sometimes in life you find coincidences that you cannot explain. These are some of those coincidences. In 86, he drew for a Jewish monthly magazine in Brussels this full-page illustration that tries to give an answer to Holocaust deniers. This is why he wrote on the bottom, Auschwitz, a myth with a question mark. Okay, and this was done after photographies. He watched the photographies of prisoners that he has in his library. He copied the building of Birkenau with the ray and a sort of patchwork of mixture of portraits of prisoners. And to him, he was just going back drawing after a break of 35 years. That was the proof that he did not forget, that he still have it. And he decided to give the most of his time to draw, because he could. And in the year later, in 87, he did some portraits of Jacques Brel, the Belgian singer that you probably all know, for a Belgian book that was published after Brel passed away in 78. This is one portrait after a photography, and this is another one. He simply drew the portrait and added the flower in his mouth. And in the same book was portraits of my father and comics that I did. These were 2 of the 4-page comics that I did about a song for Brel. That was the first time that we published together at the same publishing house in Belgium. He published his portraits and I published my comics. In 88, we had a family tragedy. My younger brother, Charlie, suicided. And that was a total shock and surprise for all of us. We did not know that he was so depressed. We did not know that he wanted to leave this world. And that was the beginning of another part of a family life. To me, that was a long questioning process that took years to heal and to understand of why did it happen. What happened in our family, in our past, in our present. To my father, that was terrible, because since the liberation, he had not to confront death. And it was not only death, that was the death of his youngest son. And I was really afraid that my father would break down totally. And for the funeral, I traveled to Brussels with my sister. We took the plane to go to his funeral, and to the mourning week in the Jewish tradition, you sit for 7 days with the family and you evoke memories about the dead. You watch family albums. You are visited and supported by family, by friends, by the community. And my father, on this week, and I was expected that we would sit with the family and friends around and tell about Charlie. Instead of that, my father began to tell his story for the first time. And to me, that was a terrible shock because I was not ready. I was not prepared psychologically. And I was also in a bad shape. Let's say that I was half broken. And I could not listen to my father. I was not ready. The timing was not the good timing to me. I was really curious and I wanted very much to know what he had passed through, but not at that time. But then later on, my father became a speaker for the community. The community was asked by the National Minister of Education in Belgium if some of the survivors or some of the resistants, Jews and not Jews, could go to high schools in Belgium and tell their story to young teenagers who are studying about Belgium occupied during the war. And my father volunteered. And little by little, it became his full-time job. He did it more than 550 times in his life during 20 years. Every year, he was going to different schools in Belgium. My father was fluent in French, Flemish, German, English, and Yiddish. So he did his testimonies mainly in French and Flemish. And he met thousands of kids. Every year, the same school, different classes. And then began to be organized these travels to Auschwitz and Birkenau for classes. But my father was invited to join the classes and to tell during the journey what he passed through. And he really became a wonderful speaker. And then this is a photo of him testimonying in Birkenau. And this is him and two other survivors, good friend of him. The man close to us is Alberto Israel, that lives in Brussels. And the man on the back is Paul Sobol, who passed away 2 months ago. And they were going together to schools and to community centers and to travel to Auschwitz. That was not easy for them, but they felt this is a mission because they were living witness and survivors of what happened, and they could tell what they saw with their own eyes, with their own experience. And their aim was to fight against Holocaust deniers. Their fight was to tell the true history, because we live in a period of post-history, of fake news, and these survivors were telling the truth. And there was a mission, and my father always accepted. Every time he was invited, he was going. That was crucial to him. And then, little by little, he was honored, decorated, and he got honors. He met the Belgian kings, Belgian queens, the Belgian government's ministers that he went with to Auschwitz too. He was interviewed by the press many times. And he was also the flag holder of the survivors in different ceremonies, as you can see. And he had his hat, prisoner hat, and he put his number in big letters. He wanted those young teenagers that he was speaking to, that when he was in the camp, he was not Henri Kichka. He was number 177789. This is the way the Nazis wanted to erase their personality, their dignity, before they were killing them. And this is a drawing that I did in the early, in 2004, of my father with a class. And he tells them that after he liberated from death camps, he became prisoner to life of his memory. Because actually what happened to my father, who kept silent for so many years, when he began to talk, no one could stop him. It became his mission in life, talking about that and transmitting his memory and his experience, which was not for us, his kids, not easy to deal with. Okay, there was not a family meeting where Auschwitz was not evoked. And one day my father discovered in the late 80s, this wonderful book that some of you probably know, A Vanished World, were photographies by Roman Wiśniak in the Jewish villages in Poland before the war. And that was a photograph testimony of Jewish life. All the villages that he has photographed disappeared. All the Jews that he photographed were exterminated. And to my father, that was an inspiration source for the drawing that he began to do. His mission now as an artist was not only drawing landscapes or anything else or still life, but to give life back to those people. And he was really a realistic artist who was very precise in details, in rendering the shades and light and the character of the people. And he did it, and he was exhibited in Belgium in galleries in Brussels and Antwerp. And he began to sell his works. That was not his aim in life, but people simply wanted to have this in their living rooms, mainly Jews, to whom these drawings somehow were connected to their own family past. And he was very, very, very good at it. And he did it for years. And each drawing is 50 by 70 centimeters. Each drawing took him 3 to 4 months of work. And this was his occupation, testimony and drawing. And look at the work, the attention and the love that he put in the way he drew those goose. And he loved classic art. He never understood abstract art. He never understood Cubism. He never liked Picasso. He was a very classic. And he really, when he was drawing, he really somehow was challenging himself to be as good as they could be. You see other drawings and other drawings. Now, at the mid-90s, he began first of all to lose his the capacity of his eyes, and he had a cataract double operation. And to him, that was too difficult to draw the same thing that he drew, these precise portraits. And suddenly he began to paint totally different things. He took a gouache, color gouache, and he drew symbolic Jewish images made of candlelights and of a Jewish star, Magen David, and in a symmetric and harmonic composition of colors. This is him in his living room. And on the wall are hanged some of his drawings, the painting of this period, like this one, that is from 93. And then one day I was visiting him at least 3 or 4 times a year, even more, because I was traveling a lot to Europe as a member of Cartooning for Peace Association. And I had exhibitions, group exhibitions, and meeting and debates with my colleagues from France and from the rest of the world, in Paris, in Brussels, in different cities in France and in Europe, in Germany too. And when I visited him in the early 2000s, I discovered that he left these sort of things and began to paint this. And I was surprised. And I asked Daddy, what is that? And he said to me that it's easier to make abstract things because having to deal with geometry and precision and symmetry became a little too difficult to him. And he did things like this drawing, or this one, or this one. And to me, because I can say I'm experienced in life at watching at works of others, because I teach at the Academy of Art in Jerusalem already for 37 years. My understanding of what my father did, of the fact that he switched to this sort of painting after the steps that he passed through. You see, he had the portraits, he had the Jewish symbols, and suddenly this. To me, that was the first time he really tried to express something personal. He tried with the skills that he had, with the capacity of abstraction that he had. This was a sort of translation of his inner world, of his distracted world inside. Because from outside, he looked great. You could see him well-dressed, well on himself. But I think that inside was a sort of chaos. Because how can you really go back to normal life after what he had passed through? And I think that those paintings are, in one hand, the less beautiful, objectively, that he did, and the most interesting. And I don't think that he really understood that he was trying for the first time in his life to express something. But to me, I really encouraged him to go on. He did a few, not a lot, because as you can see, the date at the bottom is 204. And in 204, suddenly he stopped drawing because he published his book. He published one book, this one, which is a teenage period lost in the night of the camps. And the photography that you have on the cover is the only family photo of the Kichkas in the streets of Brussels in 39 or 38. This is him, his parents, and his 2 younger sisters. And the foreword was written by Serge Klarsfeld, which you probably know or heard about, which was one of the most important French searchers on the French Holocaust of Jewish French. And his book suddenly took him to another period in his life. He became a public person because his book was on sale in bookshops. He drew much of interest. He was interviewed by the media in Belgium, by the RTBF, by the Flemish and the French Belgian television, by the written press. People were coming to interview him. Students in universities in Leuven, in Brussels, came to interview him for research that they were doing. My father really became, I can say, famous, recognized as a hero of the Holocaust, because until he was retired, he felt he's just a victim of the Holocaust. But when little by little, he could become the artist that he dreamt to be all his life. And then a writer of a book, he became, in his own eyes, but more in the eyes of others, a hero, which was not the way the survivors were considered after the liberation. Heroes were people who fought during the war, not prisoners. But actually, I think that time have allowed people to understand that just surviving the camps was heroic. And this is why I use this image in the first page of my graphic novel, Second Generation. This is the French original edition and the edition that I translated to Hebrew. And this is the first page. This is the really first page in which I tell that my father had a number on his arm, which I never read when I was a kid. And that I had at home more or less 3, 4, 5, or 6 photographies of his family. I had passports, photo of his parents who had to renew their authorization to work in Belgium every year. They were refugees. So they had passports photo. My grandfather had no camera. And this is why the only family photo was done by a street photographer. And in the book, I tell what I knew as a child, what I thought as a child, what I felt as a child, knowing that there was something very dark in the past, that my father was an orphan, that my father have suffered so much that he cannot even tell us. And I also used family photos. I used documentation that I found on Google on the Holocaust, and I had also my own imagination. This is an image that I created after a movie on Harold Lloyd, where I decided to draw my father hanged on the time he was arrested, as if time has a rest on the day he was arrested. Somehow, he stayed all his life around 42 and 45, the dark years of his life. In one of the pages of the book, I imagine when I ask myself why I never saw my father crying, my, let's say, spontaneous answer was that he could not cry anymore after the camps because he cried all the tears of his body when he was there. He never told me. I never asked him, did you cry in the camps? I'm sure he did. And he did so much that he was unable to cry afterwards. And I can really tell you that on my brother's funeral, on my mother's funeral, and in my elder sister Hannah, she passed away in 2006 of a cancer. My father he could not cry. He was broken, but he was dry, no tears. And I think that this drawing, even if it's the fruit of my imagination, even if I can't prove it, tells a lot about the suffering of those silent survivors. And this is me visiting Auschwitz with my father, which I never did. I never did until I published my book. Because I did not want, my father wanted me to come with him, but I told him that I don't want to go with a school, with high school boys and girls from Belgium. And I don't want to listen to the speeches, the wonderful speeches that he gives there. I want to be just he and me, and to tell me as his son all what happened. And he was unable to do that. But after I finished my book, I decided that at the first opportunity that I would have, I will go with him to Auschwitz, which I did 3 years later. And the end of my book, I felt liberated from the weight, from the burden of this memory. This is a heavy burden to have this untold memory on your shoulders as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult. And to me, creating my book was a way to heal it and to put the things on paper. And I can assure you that at the end, my father liked very much my book. And this book was really a part of the process of a new page in our life, of my father and me. There was no silence anymore. There was no secrets. In the book, I told my father a thing that he could not even imagine. And the thing that we have suffered at home. We have suffered of his silence. And he kept silent because he wanted to avoid us from suffering, because the truth was too heavy to tell. And I told him that his silence was also not easy to have. And having said that, everything was okay. Everything was told. In 2015, in 2005, when the first, in the 27th of January, the first time that the United Nations has decided that that would be the date of the world commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz, my father was among the 200 survivors invited. And our eldest son, David, today he's 45, decided to join his grandfather and to be with him at his side. And that this is an historical photo of the first and the third generation of Kichkas in Auschwitz for the first commemoration ever. And a few months later, I could take our two other sons, Jonathan and Eli. Eli is the photographer, so you can see him. And we joined my father and grandfather, to one of his visits to Auschwitz with a group of teachers, Belgian teachers. And it happened to be his last visit. That was really the year he was 89. And when he got 90, between 89 and 90, he got suddenly much more older and weaker. And he felt he's not strong enough to stand on his legs for 5-6 hours a day, for 2 days, telling his story. And he decided that that would be his last trip. So another coincidence was that the only time I could be with him was the last time. And to my father, that was very meaningful that he had with him a son and 2 grandsons, because that was for him the proof that Hitler failed, that the final solution failed. There were 6 million, but not all the Jewish people. And he's the living proof of this failure. And every time a grandson or a granddaughter was born, or a great-grandchildren, and he had 12 grandchildren and 9 great-grandchildren, he was publishing in the Jewish press in Belgium an announcement of the newborn, and each of them had a number. This is my 17th revenge on Hitler. This is my 21 revenge on Hitler. They all have a number of a revenge. For him, every newborn is a proof of this failure and a way of his revenge. I put brakes on the word revenge. This is a cartoon I did in 2015 on my father as a Jewish Belgian. And I think, because my father never left Belgium, my elder sister and me decided around the age of 20, each of us separately, to settle in Israel. My father stayed in Belgium. He felt deeply Belgian in his culture, in his bilingual French and Dutch. And Belgium was the country that opened its door to his family. If his family would have stayed in Poland, I would not be here today. Most probably. So somehow I simply took a part of the yellow part of the flag to put on his breast, which is to me a very strong way to tell this double belonging. Today, a French animation studio is adapting my graphic novel into an animated movie that is supposed to be finished at the end of the year. I hope so. And it will be called The Secrets of My Father, which is freely adapted from my graphic novel. A lot of what I wrote is inside the movie, and a lot of other things. It has been rewritten by a specialist who is the movie maker, Vera Belmont, a famous French movie maker. When my father was 90, we invited him to celebrate in Israel. So he came with my sister who stayed in Belgium, Irene. And because the rest of the family is here, the major part of the family is here. The more Kichkas live in Israel today. And so as a present for his birthday, we made him a surprise. We hired a gallery, an art gallery in Tel Aviv, and we exhibited my father's work because he gave us during the year some of his drawings. And but they were never exhibited in an exhibition together side by side. And that was the day of the opening. My father discovering surprise that he is invited to the opening of his own exhibition that he did not hear about. This is my father, my wife and I, and my father so pleased to rediscover those works who were at my home for years. I did not see them for a long time. This is him pointing his drawings, visiting his exhibition. He was exactly 90. And 1 week later, he came to visit us for 3 weeks. 1 week later, our grandson Leonard was born. And that was the opportunity of a family photo of 4 generations of Kichka. Henri, the grandfather, Michel, my son Eli, which is our youngest son, and our grandson Leonard. He's today 4.5. And this photography is wonderful. We all smile. We are all happy to be together. And my father has survived years and years after the Holocaust, and he could see his family growing. And this is a photo with our 2 other granddaughters from our eldest son, and our son's wife with the baby and my wife. I love those photos. To my father, they are very meaningful. They were framed in his living room, and he was watching them every day, all day long. A few years ago, in 2017, was an exhibition in the Memorial of the Holocaust in Paris of comics and Holocaust. And I took part. Pages of my graphic novel were exhibited there side by side with other famous comics that are done on this period in history. And the more the year passes, the more creators are creating comics on this period. I also saw some Dutch comics, very good Dutch comics on this period of time. And 2 years ago was published in Israel, the diary of Anna Frank, adapted by Ari Folman and David Polonsky, Israeli artists. So the exhibition also moved 1 year later to Caserne d'Ossin in Mechelen. And for this exhibition, they made a special display in the museum where the archives of the Jews during the war are located. And they put side by side with my page photographies and documents that they have in their archives about my family. And in the photograph on the right, the extreme girl on the right is my father's sister, with a Jewish star on her breast too. And 10 years ago, were settled in front of the house where my family was arrested in Brussels, this pavement, memory pavement, with the names of each of the family members. And just under my father's name is written survivor. and the other one is assassinated. A few years ago, 3 years ago, was a documentary was filmed on my father and I by a Polish-German team, and they took us to this place. And that was the first time I discovered this memory place with my father. This was the house. The upper window was his room, his sleeping room, bedroom. And that was a very moving moment. And when the movie was done, the producers asked me to create a poster. And I took this photo to draw this image. And instead of putting us there, I put ourselves on my book, because my book was, for my father and me, like opening a new page in our relationship, because the research that I did in my memory, in the photographies, and the work I did on my book allowed me to understand better my father, his silence, his never-ending speeches, our family tragedies, what happens to my brother, what about my mother. The book is very personal, but it also helped us to heal all the wounds of the past in the family. Every time I was visiting my father, I was drawing him, leaving him notes, funny notes. And in February, last February, which was 11 months ago, I visited my father in his house, in Jewish house in Brussels. And our son Eli was with his kids and his wife in Belgium and France on the same day. And so we visited him all together on the same day. And this is another photo of our fourth generation. But this time, we are all watching Leonard making us laugh. This is the most wonderful family photo that I have. I can't stop watching it, because in April, 1.5 months later, my father passed away. We could not know that this pandemic was attacking, was coming, was on its way to Europe, to all the world. And I thought that my father would stay with us until the age of at least 100. And he wished to, he wanted to. But this pandemic has decided differently. And then there was a period that we could not visit him anymore. And I was sending him cartoons and drawing by mail to the office, because my father had never was familiar to a computer, and they were printing my drawings for him. And this is my father. They were confined inside the house. They could not have their dinner together, not their breakfast together, not the supper together. They could not play cards together. Social life stopped. That was the first wave. And they were very careful on contamination. The world knew almost nothing about this virus. And so I drew my father going to play cards alone and telling that this virus is an anti-Semitic. And he loved my cartoons. He loved the way I was drawing him. For his birthday, I sent him this image of him going with his trailer in a cave with 94 candles. And he said that a small virus of 2 microns is nothing compared to what he passed through. And in the floor, there are coronavirus, Achtung, coronavirus, and Mazal Tov. And that was funny, and I sent him, and he was pleased, but he was very close to his last days. And then he was found together with 13 other people in the home. He was positive, but he had absolutely no sign. He had no fever, no ache. He was okay. And we hoped that the same way that he survived the Holocaust, he would survive the virus. But after 10 days, he suddenly, during 4 days, became, he had fever, he was weaker, He needed oxygen. He could not be taken to any hospital. All the emergency services collapsed in Belgium. No one was admitted to any hospital. So they did all what they could. But after 4 days, he passed away. And the last drawing that I did when he's in a gunfight with the Corona, with Hitler himself, he never saw it. When he passed away, 1.5 hours before it happened, I could have him on the phone. He could not speak because he had an oxygen mask. But the nurse translated him, told him that I kiss him, and he made her signs and told that he kissed me too. And this is the last time I heard his voice. And when he passed away, my sister that lives in Brussels, 10 minutes walk, a drive from the place, was admitted. She insisted to see him. And they agreed, even though it was absolutely forbidden by the health ministry, but they put all the protection that they could to allow her entrance to the house. And I think that more or less she saw him a few minutes before he really passed away. And then when we talked, one day after, she told me that my father was wearing a t-shirt with the print of this drawing that I drew for his 90th anniversary. I drew my father resting under a big tree, which is our family tree. And each of the main branches are the 4 of us, the 4 kids, and our kids and their kids. And my father is happy. He has a butterfly. He has these gardener's tools. The roots on the ground are his parents and my mother's parents. There's a little rabbit. And this is what he asked to wear on that day. And somehow I found some consolation, if it's possible to find consolation, on the way that he had all of us on his heart when he left us. And this is the story of our drawings, of our life. And we can stop now the sharing. And I'd like you, Daniel, if there were questions or if anybody wants to ask any question before we end this session. I could not read the chat if there were chats. You tell me.
No, I didn't get any chats either.
Okay.
But if people have questions, they can either send a chat or they can maybe ask it straight away.
Okay.
People cannot ask, they can only use the chat in order to pose questions.
Okay.
In the meantime, that people maybe write their questions. Michel, it's not the end yet, maybe, but I would like to share something. It's always, I have heard you talking already many times.
No, I agree. Yes, I confirm.
It's always impressing and it's always different. And it's always, and you know, what is very special, it is a very, very personal story, what you tell here. We are talking about a cruel, cruel history. And you are able to transfer this to something very special, intimate, personal, and that is a very special. That's what I would like to share with you. This.
Thank you so much.
And it's never the same. It's never. When I hear you, it's never the same. Also, and it shows also the importance, I think, of showing the other people that there are more things going on than just the Holocaust itself, but also the effect of the experiences that people had during the Holocaust on the life afterwards, and also their family members.
Absolutely.
And you show it in an excellent way. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, it's very meaningful to me to do what I do, to tell it. And because, you know, every year that passes, you are getting elder, more experience, you have a better perspective on your own history, on your own family, on your own creation. And every time, I guess I speak a little differently. I think that the first times I gave this lecture in the early 2012, I was more in emotion, or perhaps more excited somehow, if I can say so. And it was so close to me and so fresh. But I could measure through the years what was the effect of the publication of my book in our relation with my father and me. And I could not know it when I did my book, because I did it because I simply needed to do it. I needed to take this away from me, out of me, okay? And that was a sort of healing, therapeutic process, if you want to call so, you can call it so. But at the end, the existence of the book and the fact that my father, little by little, really loved it, was to me something incredible, because the truth that I tell there is sometimes very crude. I'm not every page tender with my father. There are some pages I'm not tender with him, because I thought that I need to be very frank, because this book would be one shot. There would not be another book like this one. I had one opportunity to put order in things in our family life. And my father accepted it. Not at first reading. At first reading, that was not easy, as you can imagine. But little by little, he was so proud of the fact that we had two books in the family, one of the first generation and one of the second generation. And when he was going afterwards to schools or to Auschwitz, he took also my book, not only his, as something that, to me, that was really, I was so happy to know it. And it makes the things much easier to us. And my better understanding is the best thing you can do in life when you have family problems is to find a way to tell the truth and not to keep things in the belly. And I think I did it in a way that my father could accept. And that was an incredible lesson to me in life, and to our family too.
I see some reactions over here. First of all, I'm Israel Chai. Somebody writes here, and very moving. And Israel Chai is like Israel lives forever. Okay. Very moving, the words needed. Thank you. Touching story. Thank you very much for sharing this warm family history. There is a fear, but also laughter. Beautiful drawings. Stay well.
I see the chat. I see the chat too in English. Here. Oh yes, I have it.
Yes. Okay, so then you can maybe relate to it. For example, there's one here also that's asked for getting it as an ebook, or maybe you can relate to this also. I asked you also many times whether there is a Dutch translation, because somebody asked also about a Dutch edition. So maybe you can say something about whether that would be possible, or there is something in the air for the near future about an ebook, your book as an ebook, or a Dutch edition of the book. Or
okay, it does not depend on me. It depends of tractation between my French editor and a Dutch editor. There's an ebook in English called Second Generation, since I did not tell my father. But in Dutch, not yet. I would be very pleased to know this book is in Dutch. Till now, it has been translated to Polish and German, to Turkish and Greek, to Spanish, Italian, English, and Hebrew, which is a lot to me, because I know that young readers in Poland today, high school boys and girls, for example, and readers in Germany, could access this story, because, as you said, the way I tell it in such a personal way, I think that this is one of the best ways to learn history, not by facts and figures and dates that you have to remember to get your grades at school, but by personal stories. because the official history is written, and is written differently according to the countries. But the testimony of the survivors and of people who have been kids of survivors is a way to appropriate yourself this part of history and to have it with the little details of how was life after, which is very important. And I would be very, very grateful if some Dutch editor would approach my French publisher to have it in Dutch too. I think it's very important.
Mm-hmm. There's also a question here, but maybe you answered it actually, I think so.
Yes.
I'm very impressed. Daniel concludes that the power is in the transformations in the story and to deal with the trauma. How can we transfer this into education? Do you have any examples? But maybe you said it already also, no? That like how you, by telling a personal story, for example.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. You know, I think that I have also listened to testimonies of other survivors, and I have also read books of other survivors, and everyone has a different way to tell. And every story is outstanding because it's impossible to imagine what it was. It's impossible. And I visited Birkenau. When I visited Auschwitz and Birkenau with my father, on the first day I was in Auschwitz with my father. The day after I was with Alberto Israel in Birkenau. And we were a group of 15 people walking with him from the entrance of the camp till the exit. After every few steps, he was stopping and telling what happened on the very place he's standing on the day that he arrived. His memory was so clear, and it was so hard to him to tell it, and so important to tell it. And I think that when you have this experience with a survivor, it's not like a history class. It's a personal, emotional story based on true facts, told with franchise and courage, and it touches you differently. Studying history school does not touch you. You all the time worry about your grades, not about history. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that I did it too, and that I could meet also other people than my father. And I heard from them how courageous was my father, because among the survivors in Belgium, he's probably the one who passed the longest time in the camps. Mm-hmm. Some of the survivors told me, you know, your father is not like me. I was 1 year and a half. Your father was 2 years and a half and he survived. And which is, in other words, like a miracle. And I think that his strong will to survive is something that kept him, that avoiding to fall down or to break down. But I know that with the years, even though he became famous and etc. and decorated and so on, it was harder and harder to him. I think that the way of the past actually was higher. It was harder on his shoulders. It did not make it easier. It's a mistake to think that with the year, this trauma was easier to them. I think it was harder. But they had the courage inside, and they had a mission in life, you know, a straight line. I need to testimony as long as I can, because after me, will be nobody to do it.
There's another question here regarding the animation movie, the upcoming animation movie that's
yes.
might be addressed at a younger audience. Does that mean that the experiences of your father in the Holocaust will have to be represented in a different, perhaps more careful or less explicit way?
The experience on the camps is not in the movie. Mm-hmm. Because the movie is on the kids. It's on us. watching our father living today. So nobody can do an animation on the Holocaust. And all the films done on the Holocaust were very hard to do. Like the Schindler's List and others. I take just, some of the most famous. I think the representation of the Holocaust in cinema is a very tough question that some of the good filmmakers try to deal with, but this animated movie is done for the whole family, for a very wide audience. So they took out of the book things that could not be on screen to open the screening to everybody. But still, I read the script. I had to give my okay to the script, which took some time, okay, because the changes were so that I needed to get used to the fact that an adaptation is also a change. Okay, it's not 100% my book, but the emotion is there. The emotion is there, and this is the most important thing for film lovers. So there's not such scenes in the movie. There are some, I haven't seen it yet. Yes, I saw the storyboard and I've seen a few images, but I know it's not inside because it's not in my book too. It's not a part of it.
There's another question here regarding the question of humor. You are using humor also. And then is the question here, did you ever struggle with the combination from grief in combination with humor? Or did it come natural? And did it come for you with a feeling of balance?
Okay. First of all, I'm a humor lover. And since I'm a boy. And I put a lot of humor generally in my cartoons. And when I was in the process of writing, all the memories that I had funny memories. Okay, there were funny things at home. And when I decided that the writing was finished and now that was the time to put this in images, to me that was totally natural and logic, that I would keep all the good things, the funny one and the dramatic one. And so I think that what happened to the book, and I forgot to mention it, but I had an editor in Paris. In the publishing house was an editor, Gisèle Dehaene, and she coached me all the way long. And she encouraged me not to put the funny things out of the book. And so the book goes like this. You have tragic moments and funny moments, okay? And I heard from readers that these parts are liberating. Okay, after you got the pages in the book when I talk about my brother's suicide are not funny. But a few pages later, there's a funny memory about something else. And suddenly it liberates you as a reader. And so I understood that was the first time I really wrote a book. I wrote a lot of comics before, but they were never books. They were short stories. So I understood that there's in the technique of catching the attention of readers, the fact that you have different rhythms inside the book. And I had this coaching all the way long to make me understand that the good choices that I had to do, but the humor is not about the Holocaust. The humor is about our family life, about my father that sometimes was funny, even when he did not mean to be funny, because he had a very strong character. He was not an easy person. And the way I depict him somehow in some pages is very funny for readers. And even for him.
Because of the late hour, maybe one last question.
Yes.
And maybe that's also a good question to finish with.
Yes.
How about the third generation? Are your sons also involved in some kind of writing or drawing of the memory of the Second World War, the Shoah, or memory or writing? Is their life also affected as yours by the story and the life of your father?
A good question. Every time I'm asked this question, I answer, you can ask them, okay? But I will answer you. I think there's a total difference of having a father as a survivor or a grandfather as a survivor. The other difference is that our sons were born in Israel. They are Israelis. And they did not live like me as a small minority of Jews in Belgium. And they could talk very freely to my father. Okay? To me as a son, that was harder to be open to my father. The grandkids are freer. Sometimes as kids, they ask questions that I never dare asking. I was afraid to ask, but they could do. On the other hand, I want to tell just a little anecdote, is that my father-in-law that passed away in 2006, he was a French who was born in Greece, in Saloniki. And during the war, he escaped France and joined the British Army in the Greek corps of the British Army. And he participated to the debarkment in Italy. And so our sons have, in the past history of the first generation, two examples. One grandfather who survived the Holocaust, and one grandfather who combats, who took weapon to combat, to fight the Nazis. And these, for him, for our sons, were an example, a guideline in life. And when our eldest son, David, was decorated as an officer in Sahel, that was a ceremony, and the two grandfathers came to be at the ceremony, because for them, who have survived the war, each of them in a different way, they were so proud to have their first grandson officer in Sahel. And that was a sort of, a sort of holistic history of the family, of the people, of the 20th century. That was a wonderful moment. And they are very much concerned by what is happening today in the world. They are aware of the past. They are in my book too. I drew them as kids. They are proud to have been drawn in the book. And my wife too. But today they look at what is happening in the world in the rise of anti-Semitism, and mostly during this pandemic. And they look at what is happening and are worried and are concerned. And we have talked about that. And we have a lot of exchange on our WhatsApp group, family group. And the last year we could almost not meet, but we talk a lot about what is happening in the world. And today is a special day for us. And the day of the birthdays of the grandfather is a special day too. So it's all the time here, but for them, that was a way to construct themselves with a very positive image. And to me, that was a problem that I had to deal with. So it's totally different. I can't say, and someone would have to ask them one day if they feel any post-trauma. I can't say, I have no answer to this. This is too personal. That belongs to them. I can't answer for them. I don't know.
Well, the purpose of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day is twofold. Yes. To serve as a date for official commemoration of the victims and of the Nazi regime, and to promote at the other side Holocaust education throughout the world. If I think about this, then I think you did a very, very, very good job today also. At both points, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Okay.
That's the first time we meet on Zoom.
That's right.
Usually we meet in the
That's right.
school.
We hope to meet soon again.
I hope to meet you next time there, exactly. And not on screen. And
Gentlemen, Gentlemen, I want to thank you both. Merci beaucoup. Toda raba. From all the reactions we get, I think your story just reached home and got to everybody's hearts. And if I may summarize it in one word, it's the triumph of life over hatred.
Wow.
And I think this is exactly what your family represents. And from what I understand, your father has tried to make this triumph live every day of his life.
Yes.
And I guess the other one, not only for himself, but for all those who did not survive, who were murdered, and for whom he probably, just like many other Holocaust survivors, felt very, maybe even guilty, but at least the mission of keeping their memory alive. And
Yes.
this is what we've done today. I want to thank you, Daniel. I want to thank you, Michel, very much. I want to thank the audience, and you can, of course, watch this, the recording of this lecture whenever you have time. And you can, of course, pass it on to other people who might be interested. And I'm sure there will be many of those. Thank everybody again. Have a very good evening, and a good, survive Corona as well.
Yes.
And we hope to see you all again in many of our other activities.
My father would have liked your conclusion.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye, Daniel.
Dit gaat.